All right. So, a couple things for you guys to know. This is the screen that should generally pop up for you in your in the Zoom application. And so you'll hit enter. Over here on the left, you'll see audio settings. If you're having issues hearing us or having issues with volume or anything, you can check there. Just make sure everything's set right. The next box is Q&A. This is where we want you to put any questions that you have. So if you've got a question for Candace during the webinar, if there's something that you want to make sure is asked or that we follow up with, we ask that you do it there. The reason is because we're able to track questions a lot more easily here than in the next box, which is chat. And because the chat is what will show up over on your right side of the screen, the Q&A will show up for us until we answer it. The chat can actually scroll through as we talk. So if you guys want to talk amongst yourselves, or if we ask for some input, like if we ask you guys to share with us a little bit about, your opinion or what you're thinking, or provide some feedback, feel free to do that there. But if you have questions, we ask you to use the Q&A. The next one is raise hand. We don't really use that. I usually ask folks to let me know if they can hear me, but I figure if folks can hear me, they would have let me know by now. And then the last one, you'll notice that when Candace shared her screen, it probably took over your entire computer screen. If you don't want that to happen, you can click on view options and exit full screen, and it'll take it out of full screen so that you can not take over your whole screen with that. So that's kind of the nuances of Zoom. For continuing education credit, we are able to offer 1 hour of CE credit for the webinar today, which is exciting. We do require that you register for the webinar, attend the entire thing, and complete the survey to get that CE credit. After the webinar, I will send out a email with a PDF version of the slides, as well as a link for you to complete the survey. That survey will be available for 1 week. So it'll be available until next Wednesday evening. And you just have to provide your feedback in that, anonymous, and then you'll have a link at the end of the survey to print out your certificate, and you can have that from there. We do frequently have recordings available of our webinars, but please do note that you can't watch the recording and get the credit for that. Any questions about the logistics, about the Zoom platform or the CE credit? Yeah. All right, well then I'm gonna let Candace take over. I'll pop on a couple of times to kind of give some input on a couple of things we're working on, but Candace has got it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. Appreciate it. And she actually has been the rock star behind most of this webinar, so, but I appreciate the props. So I'm excited to share with you guys today some things that I've learned personally and professionally about compassion fatigue. One of the ways that we wanted to start out this webinar was just kind of premising it with, like Christine said, at the end of the holidays, this is a time when compassion fatigue can really take a toll. So we wanted to kind of make an awareness of what compassion fatigue really is, what it looks like, and what we can do to prevent that, because it can be very taxing on us. So one of the things that's on this very first slide that I love is the anonymous quote that says, "It's not the load that breaks us down, it's the way we carry it." And we know that, if you work in a helping profession, or if you have family that you care for, any kind of caregiving, it can get to a place where it does end up becoming something that feels as though it's too heavy for us and it's breaking us down. But it's really the way that we're carrying the load that causes the issues. So I wanted to give us kind of a premise of a case study, if you will, on what it looks like for someone who might be suffering from compassion fatigue. Sometimes it's better for me to have like a picture of what this would look like in real life, instead of somebody just constantly giving me, statistics. So we talked about Jane, and I wanted you guys to consider Jane for a minute. And some of you may feel like Jane, or you may know a Jane. So Jane is a 34-year-old caseworker. who specializes in helping with children who are placed in foster care temporarily. She's been working really long hours, so much so that she has been working through her lunch break for the last 6 months. Just trying to catch up, trying to get to that place where we feel caught up in our work, and if we have to work through lunch to get there, there's, got to be some light at the end of the tunnel. She recently had to take time off of work due to some migraines that she's been having for some reason here lately. She's kind of always had some headaches, but they've gotten worse and worse recently. She complains to others at work about how unsatisfying her job is. Maybe she's not cut out for this type of work. So sometimes you can catch her having conversations in the break room or at the copier, maybe just talking over the phone, saying that, maybe this isn't what she's supposed to be doing because it just doesn't satisfy her anymore. It's just not her type of work. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. She's been struggling to meet deadlines at work, and her supervisor recently requested a meeting with her. You're not hitting the levels that we expect of you. We're going to have to sit down and have a chat about what's really going on. Jane recently had a discussion with her family too, and her family told her that she seemed easily agitated and exhausted lately. She comes home cranky. She doesn't want to do anything when she is home. Maybe she's not talking to the family as much as she used to. Just some kind of warning signs that have come out for Jane. So this is a pretty real story. Like that, I know a lot of people like this, and I myself have been in this place where Jane is. So just kind of to give you an overview of what you might be looking at when it comes to compassion fatigue. So I love my little kitty in the corner. I'm glad Christine kept it on the slideshow because that's like my favorite little kitty. It talks a little bit on this slide about compassion fatigue, what it is and what it isn't. I think a lot of times to address compassion fatigue, you have to really understand what compassion fatigue is, but you also have to understand what it is not. So compassion fatigue is defined as secondhand shock or secondary stress caused by helping others who have suffered trauma or have significant emotional distress. So it's often caused by empathy. It's not often, it's almost always caused by empathy, and it can imitate symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So a lot of times you will start to exhibit PTSD symptoms because of compassion fatigue. When you're in a situation where you're trying to help other people and you're a caregiver, it becomes so overwhelming at times that you start to feel what the other person feels rather than just being there as a support. And that's when compassion fatigue can really start to set in, is when we get to this place where we're helping these people and we know that they need help, but now we've gotten to a place where it becomes our feelings too. So we're all feeling this together. What it isn't, it is not fake or made up, and it's not all in your head. And that's something that I have heard all of my life, even from professional people, that compassion fatigue is just in your head and you just need to get over it. You need to move on. Compassion fatigue is not all in your head. It is a real thing that people experience when trying to help other people. It's caused by empathy, like we said earlier. It's a natural consequence of stress resulting from caring for and helping traumatized or suffering people. So understand, before I continue, I want to help you understand, trauma is anything that takes place in your life that was an unexpected event, right, that causes some kind of significant emotional response. So trauma does not have to be severe to be trauma. Just helping people who are suffering can be traumatic for the people that are helping. So I just want to premise that and help you understand a little bit about trauma. Sometimes I think we feel like trauma has to be this huge, extravagant deal before it's considered trauma, and that's not the case. Trauma can be anything that's a changing event that causes an emotional reaction. You can suffer trauma from that. So wanted to share that as well. Big thing for us to understand, and this is one thing I really want to spend some time focused on in this webinar, is burnout versus compassion fatigue. because they are different. They are not the same thing. And often people will label one as burnout and label one as compassion fatigue, and they're not. They're not interchangeable things. Now, they can be together. They can happen together, but they are two separate things. So I want to talk a little bit about why they're different, what makes them different. So burnout, I think we have all definitely been there. To be honest, I think it doesn't matter where you work or what you're working in or who you're experiencing while you're working there, you can have burnout. So burnout is stresses in the workplace. So if you're a cashier, you're going to experience customers, especially this time of year, who are going to cause stress. They're not happy no matter what you do. You're in the business of customer service. You're trying to help them. And no matter what you say or do, it's just not enough for that person because they came in with issues before they ever started checking out. If you're in a helping profession, if you're working with individuals on a constant basis, and you just can't seem, no matter what you do, you don't see any progress, you don't see anything moving forward. This can cause stresses in the workplace. Maybe some of your coworkers are causing issues. Maybe the front office staff is causing, whatever the situation is. Any stressor in the workplace can cause burnout. So problems with coworkers, for some reason, pay didn't happen the way that we thought it was going to happen. Something got cut out of our pay, or just feeling like you are not in control of your work environment. Some of the characteristics of burnout kind of go hand in hand with compassion fatigue, but they're not quite as severe. Compassion fatigue is a very severe state. So characteristics of burnout, emotional exhaustion, just tired, no matter what. I'm always tired. If you are down in energy drinks like crazy, you might be experiencing some burnout. That's for all of you out there who are drinking unhealthy energy drinks. That's free. Alienation from work-related activities. So you're getting to a place where you don't even want to be around work or work-related activities. People, maybe the coworkers are having a get-together and you're like, I'm not going, I'm done. I'm feeling like I've just had too much when it comes to work stuff. And reduced performance. So you're going to have situations where supervisors or maybe even coworkers are going to mention something has changed with your work. Like you were doing great. It was going really good. And then all of a sudden, not so much anymore. We're not seeing from you what we used to see, or you don't even seem like you want to be here. So those are kind of some symptoms, if you will, of burnout. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's compassion fatigue then, because we know what burnout is, but what is compassion fatigue in comparison to burnout? So compassion fatigue is an emotional and physical feeling. It's emotional and physical burnout created by the trauma of helping others in distress. So it leads to a reduced capacity for empathy towards suffering in the future. That's important that we know that. If we get to a place of compassion fatigue and we don't treat it quickly, it can end up affecting who we are and what we can do for others in the future. Like it can really start to take a toll on you. So much so that you may end up leaving the helping profession even though you know in your heart of hearts that you're a helping professional. So it's important that we understand that emotional and physical burnout created by trauma, by helping others in distress, is what leads to compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue characteristics go a little bit deeper. They get down to the core of things. When we get to this place of compassion fatigue, the characteristics include some intrusive negative thoughts, like just constantly in the back of your head getting these thoughts that, maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this. Maybe I'm not good at what I do. Just all these negative thoughts start to flood in. Maybe that person doesn't like me. Maybe that's why they're treating me that way. Maybe nobody likes me. Physical problems, you can have some gastrointestinal issues. Oftentimes people with compassion fatigue that are in this state, accompanied with some of the other symptoms, they'll have like just upset stomach all the time. Maybe even have been to the doctor a few times and the doctor's like, I don't see anything medically to be able to diagnose you with a problem. There can be some serious headaches. Headaches is a big symptom related to compassion fatigue. So I'm going to touch on that more in some other slides, but I do want to make you aware that headaches are a big symptom related to compassion fatigue. And lethargy, tiredness, it goes beyond emotional exhaustion and it becomes physical. So at this point, we're getting to a place where emotional exhaustion is surpassed, and now we're feeling some physical exhaustion. We're not able to get up and be motivated to do the things that we normally do, including work and home. So this is outside of just work-related activities. This is home-related activities too. So interesting enough that we could experience those symptoms at work and at home. A loss of hope, so you start to feel some hopelessness. Compassion fatigue, for whoever asked that question, compassion fatigue is considered worse than burnout. So it's like your next level. Burnout is your beginning. It's where things start at work. Compassion fatigue, like I just said a minute ago, actually takes it to the next level. So it's turning you from a burnout to this is affecting every aspect of my life. Compassion fatigue will affect every part of your being. That's why it's so important that we talk about it. It really is, because it affects you and it affects everybody around you. So loss of hope, you start to question your contribution to society, your contribution to your work, your contribution to your family. Am I a good father? Am I a good mother? Am I doing the things for my parents that I should be doing? Whatever it is, there's skepticism and guilt involved. And we're going to go over these a little bit more in some other slides, but I just want to touch on them and let you know that these are some serious things that are life-changing, life-altering symptoms that you can experience from compassion fatigue. Moving on. Maybe. Okay, so the primary difference, this will answer your question a little bit too. The primary difference, burnout is not trauma related. So compassion fatigue is related to trauma and distress, okay? Burnout is not trauma related. It's related to characteristics of your environment. So burnout is about where you work. Compassion fatigue is about what you do, the work that you do. So that kind of helps to answer that question too, the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. Burnout is about your employment, where you work. It's the environment. Compassion fatigue results from exposure to working with people who suffer from traumatic events, and it's about the work that you're actually doing. So being a caregiver, being a helper, anything like that, that can cause you to experience compassion fatigue. And it can coexist with burnout. But burnout I would consider like the beginning level, whereas compassion fatigue takes it to a whole new level. Because it's exposing you to more emotional because you're dealing with traumatic events. So there's a lot of emotion tied to that. This is a good quote from C. Figley from 1995, and I think Christine and I just wanted to share this with you guys. It says, "We've not been directly exposed to the trauma scene, right? We weren't there when it happened, but we hear the story told with such intensity, oftentimes, or we hear similar stories so often, or we have the gift and the curse of extreme empathy and we suffer. We feel the feelings of our clients, we experience their fears, we dream their dreams. Eventually, we lose a certain spark of optimism, humor, and hope. We tire. We aren't sick, but we aren't ourselves." And that is a great description of compassion fatigue. So how does it develop? I'm so glad you asked. Compassion fatigue was often triggered by patient care situations with nurses. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar and had talked to Christine about doing it, as I was a nurse for 10 years before I became a therapist. And the last 4 years of my nursing career, I worked with hospice. And so compassion fatigue was a constant topic when we were working with hospice clients or hospice patients, because you get to this place where you know what your job is and you know what you're expected to do, but you do start to feel what your patients are feeling, and you start to experience what they're experiencing. And then the family comes in, and there's just so much traumatic grief that takes place that it can cause compassion fatigue really quickly. So originally, compassion fatigue was kind of related to the medical field as far as nursing goes. And this is some of the beliefs that nurses had that led to compassion fatigue. So they would believe that their actions would not make a difference or never seem to be enough. So what happened is they got to this place where they were helping so much in situations, and if they weren't seeing enough change that they felt, and a lot of times that's our own expectation, right? If they weren't seeing enough change, they would feel as though they weren't making a difference, or no matter what they did, it would never be enough. And they would also experience problems with the system. So more patients than they can handle with a high patient census, heavy assignments, high acuity. So people are really, really, really sick, and we're constantly trying to take care of these crisis patients. Overtime and extra work days. Hey, we need you to pick up an extra shift. We're overloaded. Can you help? And because we're caregivers, right, we're automatically yes people, and we're the first ones to say, I'll take that extra shift. I want to help people. Had personal issues such as inexperience or inadequate energy identified with the patients. So a lot of times if there was some kind of personal thing going on, it would affect their work, and they would take it to work, and then therefore they were not able to keep up with what duties and responsibilities they had at work. And sometimes would even overlook serious patient symptoms. So I got my check marks of things that I need to look for in this patient. I looked for them. They're not there. Put the blanket back over them and walk out. Well, unfortunately, with compassion fatigue, you get to a place where concentration and focus are an issue, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And so when we get to that place, we can often overlook very, very important symptoms that we just wanted to finish the checklist and move on to the next patient. So that's kind of how compassion fatigue developed. Now this part, I have a top 10 list for you of what you might see with compassion fatigue. So I wanted to kind of create something that would help you to understand, how do I know if I have compassion fatigue, or how do I know if somebody I know has compassion fatigue? So here's a top 10 list of things you might see with compassion fatigue. I don't have the cool music, or I would play it for you. Number 10, you are falling asleep in meetings, appointments, or sessions. So here's one thing that I know that I've experienced when I had compassion fatigue in the past, was I found myself trying to listen to my client in a session and yawning a lot. I struggled with yawning a lot, and come to find out there was some exhaustion underneath emotionally that I did not know was there. So number 10, what you might see would be if you're falling asleep in meetings, appointments, or sessions. Number 9, you are dreading an activity you normally enjoy. So you kind of gotten to the place where, you know, I used to love going out and taking a walk in the park, and now I just don't even want to go to the park. I just don't even want to get out. So you start dreading activities you normally enjoy. Maybe this is like an activity with your family. Maybe you and your family meet every Sunday for lunch. And all of a sudden you find yourself just not wanting to go anymore, not wanting to be out, not wanting to be around crowds, or I don't want to be around people. So you start to dread activities that you would normally enjoy. Number 8. I can't do it as cool as David Letterman, but I'm trying. Number 8, people keep telling you that you seem moody. This is a big one because people are honest. They really are, and they don't have a problem telling you when you're seeming moody. So that's something to be listening for. If you hear it from, my mom's always told me this since I was young, if you hear it from more than one person, then it's probably not them that's the issue. So just keep that in mind. People are telling you that you seem moody lately. Number 7, you cancel appointments more than you keep them. So if you're getting to a place, and this can be any appointment, guys, it doesn't just have to be work related. That's the thing about compassion fatigue. It's taking it a step farther than just work related. So this could be appointments. If you had appointments to have your hair done and you just don't care anymore and you start canceling the appointments, or if you had appointments with doctors and you just don't feel like going because it's not about your self-care right now, then you might cancel those appointments. But specifically at work, if you're in a helping profession and you're making appointments with clients and you stop the appointments, you just cancel them because you just don't feel like you can handle another sad story, or you don't feel like you can handle another outbreak of emotion, or those are things to really, really watch for, because that is definitely a sign of some compassion fatigue. Number 6, you have a headache almost daily. I told you I was going to bring this up again, and probably will in future slides. Compassion fatigue is known for the headaches, for sure. What happens is we have anxiety and stress, and it starts to change our blood flow to our brain, to the rest of the parts of our body. The tension in our neck starts to cause issues with nerve endings, and you end up having headaches. So you have a headache almost daily. Number 5, there is never enough sleep to be had. The craziest thing about this is you can sleep all night long, get a full 7-8 hours. Y'all are lucky if you get that. 7 or 8 hours, and then wake up exhausted, like you have not slept at all. So you have to be real cautious with this. Maybe you're napping more. Maybe during the day you just find yourself being drained and you feel like you have to take naps throughout the day just to keep up. So number 5, there's never enough sleep to be had. Number 4, some of this is age related, but compassion fatigue can also cause your body aches more than usual. So not the normal aches and pains that some of us experience because of our age, but going beyond that and having more and more body aches than you usually have. Number 3, you find yourself becoming emotional with clients, coworkers, or family members. Here's a big one, guys. Your empathy in compassion fatigue becomes sympathy. So we know the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is when we understand what someone feels. Sympathy is when we feel what someone feels. So that's important to know too. Compassion fatigue takes it to a new level. Instead of understanding what people feel, we actually start to feel what other people feel. So then next thing you know, when you're sitting with somebody and you're talking to them and they become upset, you become upset with them, and that can grow and fester into something so much greater. So it's very important to know that a sign of compassion fatigue is when we get to a place where I start to feel everybody else's emotions too. So I don't just have my own emotional stuff going on. I'm feeling everybody else's emotional stuff too. Number 2, you hate your job. This is really important because if you are in a helping profession, you're in that profession because you're a helper. It's what you do. It's your calling. It's whatever you want to label it. It's where you're supposed to be. It's your purpose for life. So if you are starting to hate your job, it can lead to you questioning your purpose. So number 2 is very important. If you're starting to hate your job, it can lead to questioning your purpose. And number 1, you're considering you may not be good at what you do. And that is definitely compassion fatigue, because you are good at what you do or you wouldn't be doing it. So it's important to know that that's the top 10 things of what you might see with compassion fatigue. So then some other symptoms that I want to share with you, and they're just kind of broad symptoms of what you might experience yourself or what you might see in other people related to compassion fatigue. And this gets a little more specific and detailed, so I'm going to go through it probably a little quicker because I want to get to some of the other slides. But cognitive symptoms that you might see when it comes to compassion fatigue. I was talking earlier about lowered concentration, lack of focus. Some of us have that anyways, but it gets worse with compassion fatigue. So your concentration is lowered. There's apathy, rigidity, disoriented even. Sometimes, if you're getting to compassion fatigue, a lot of times you could be driving to somewhere and then stop when you get there and go, I don't even remember driving here or why I was coming. So we can get to a place where we start to lose that concentration and get disoriented. Minimization, preoccupation with the trauma. If somebody's sharing their traumatic story or their traumatic information with you, and you're coming home and that's all you can focus on, that's definitely a sign of compassion fatigue. You're taking their trauma and you're owning it, right? You're hanging on to it, and then you're preoccupied with it. You're thinking about it constantly. Inability to complete tasks or assignments. So we've gotten to a place where we feel disorganized and we're not able to complete the tasks or assignments that are given to us. And then difficulty meeting deadlines. So we've got deadlines, we know what they are, but we just can't seem to meet them no matter how hard we try. So what might others see emotionally in compassion fatigue? And this is where I was talking about where compassion fatigue kind of differs from burnout, because it goes a little bit deeper. We're dealing with some really deep-rooted emotions that can come up with compassion fatigue. So it can cause powerlessness, anxiety, guilt, anger, numbness, fear, helplessness. Some of you recognize these, especially if you work in the mental health field. You're going to recognize a lot of these symptoms. Sadness, depression. You feel depleted all the time. Maybe you're in shock, blunted or enhanced affect. So what that means is either you're like over dramatic with your affect. Maybe you're laughing really, really loud in situations, or you're crying uncontrollably, and they don't really call for that kind of response. But blunted can mean you're not showing anything. So other people are upset and you're just not feeling it. You're not feeling that upsetness. You're not feeling that sadness that everybody else around you seems to be feeling. Experiencing troubling dreams, similar to another person's troubling dream. So if somebody shares their trauma with you and you go home and you're dreaming and re-experiencing that trauma for them, that's definitely a sign of compassion fatigue, 100%. So suddenly and involuntarily recalling a frightening experience while working with a patient or family. And there are times, guys, when, especially in this field, when we're working with people where something gets triggered and we know it, we can feel it deep down. We know that something's being triggered. So with compassion fatigue, it's hard to control that trigger. So that's what this means. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get triggered. It just means that it's hard for you to cope at the moment or control that trigger while you're working with the patient or family. Excessive blaming. So we're getting to a place where it's everybody else's fault. You know, it's our boss's fault. It's our coworker's fault. It's our client's fault. It's our husband's fault, it's our kids' fault, it's everybody's fault but our own, right? So a lot of excessive blaming. And then bottled up emotions. So people are asking you what's going on and why you seem so moody. Remember we mentioned moody earlier. People are asking you, you know, what's going on? Why are you so moody? Why do you have these changes, mood changes so much lately? And your answer is nothing, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. So you have to watch out for those bottled up emotions because others may see that as part of compassion fatigue. So behaviorally, there's definitely some irritability. We've talked about the moodiness, being withdrawn, poor sleep, having nightmares. Appetite change is a big one. We're going to talk a little bit about that further on, the importance of nutrition. Hypervigilance, maybe isolating yourself from other people. Poor self-care is a big one. We've gotten to a place where, you know, we used to take care of ourselves. We used to spend more time on ourselves, and maybe we're not so much anymore. So there may be a change in hygiene, even appearance that you notice. You may be able to kind of recognize that somebody's really, quote unquote, let themselves go when it comes to self-care. So that's important to look out for. A high amount of voiced complaints from others. Like I said earlier, I'm going to reiterate it again. If multiple people are complaining about you about the same thing, it's probably not all those people that are the problem. And we really have to be self-aware of that and address it. High absenteeism, maybe we just want to avoid people and work. Even though we're in a helping profession, we've started to get to a point where we miss multiple days or we have to take multiple days off. Outbreaks of aggressive behavior. So this is a big one too for you to watch out for behaviorally, is you snap easy. You know, when you're in compassion fatigue and there's so much emotion that you're keeping inside, we know this working in the mental health field, that when you keep emotions inside and you keep them bottled up, Eventually your tea kettle's going to boil over, right? It's going to blow. You're going to have the steam come out. So there may be outbreaks of aggressive behaviors related to compassion fatigue as well. Spiritual, this is important because a lot of people have spiritual strengths. So some things that you might see spiritually in people with compassion fatigue, maybe they're not attending the spiritual support groups or meetings that they used to. Maybe there's a change in their value or belief system. Maybe they don't even believe anymore. All of a sudden they've completely changed everything that they used to believe in into not believing anything. Maybe there's a lot of complaints about what used to be spiritual strengths. You know, this used to work for me spiritually and now it doesn't work for me anymore, so I'm just going to give up on it. I don't believe in it anymore. It's not helping. Or you start to even question life's meaning. So you get this hopelessness and this loss of purpose like we were talking about earlier. And then you start to question your religious beliefs. And they may be beliefs you've had all your life. They may be family values that you've had all your life. Whatever the situation, all of a sudden, it's just not enough for you. And so there's some skepticism involved or some change in that belief system. Somatic symptoms, chronic physical ailments. We talked about the gastrointestinal. Sweating is another one. Rapid heart rate. Difficulty breathing, catching your breath, aches and pains, dizziness. Your immune system can actually become impaired because of compassion fatigue. The headaches are there again. I told you we're going to mention them several times. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Or excessive sleeping is another one that's not on here that we need to look at. So excessive sleeping is another one. So those are some actual physical symptoms. And you may have been to the doctor and the doctor says they don't know what's wrong with you. So it's really important for us to look at these symptoms and address whether or not they might be related to compassion fatigue. So Mother Teresa understood compassion fatigue. And she wrote in her plan to her superiors that it was mandatory for her nuns to take an entire year off from their duties every 4 to 5 years to allow them to heal from the effects of their caregiving work. We're not so lucky. I don't think our bosses are going to give us a year off. But it is important to understand when we need to take breaks and what needs to change to break the cycle of compassion fatigue. So we're going to talk a little bit about breaking the cycle for compassion fatigue. It's important that we understand now that we know what compassion fatigue is. We know what it looks like. We know what might happen with it. How do we change it? What do we do different? How do we get to a place where compassion fatigue does not overtake us? So breaking the cycle, here are some really important things that we can do. You know, we talk to people in the mental health field about this all the time, and yet we're terrible at practicing it. Honestly, I'm just being honest with you. That's me. I'm terrible at practicing what I preach. So meditate. You have to breathe deeply. Deep breathing promotes physical and emotional wellness. It decreases stress and it increases your immune system. Just breathing deeply can make a huge impact on the physical and emotional wellness of your body. It really can. Just deep breathing. Creativity is key. Be creative. I love to be creative. And I know that most people usually have something, some talent or some hobby. Some of us are hidden talents and hobbies, but that you can use to do something you like. Hobbies are helpful. Hiking, planting, cooking, that's not my hobby, or even coloring. These are some great hobbies for you to have that can be very helpful for you. So use your creativity. Be creative. Everyone needs to vent. And I said this in the one we've done before for the compassion fatigue webinar. Even therapists need therapists. It's true. You have to find a person to vent to that you trust and you're comfortable being vulnerable with. Find that person, know that that person is a support system for you, and take advantage of that person. Everybody, not just people venting to us. Sometimes we need to vent too. We really need that break. And then awareness. So addressing compassion fatigue from an awareness perspective, we talked a little bit about, recognizing compassion fatigue and understanding what it looks like and how we can help it some. And we're going to go a little bit further into more things you can do to help with compassion fatigue. But here's some ways to address it. Awareness is important. So you have to understand what are the types of cases that have gotten your stress level increased so much that you feel like you're vulnerable to compassion fatigue. And don't be afraid to say, this is something I cannot do. This is a client that I feel I'm not able to give my 100% to right now. Or this is a client that when we talked, it triggered some things for me that I need to work on. And so maybe this is something we need to reassign. Know if your caseload is too much, and don't hesitate to reach out and say, okay, I understand that I have things that I need to do, tasks that I need to complete for my job, but I also need you to understand that I am reaching a level of compassion fatigue. So don't be afraid to speak up for yourself on those things. Take a look at the symptoms of compassion fatigue. This is good questions for you guys to ask yourself right now during this webinar. Those symptoms that we went over, do any of them look familiar? Are you aware of any of the issues or factors in your workday? Because you could be at risk right now for compassion fatigue. There's a screening inventory, and you're gonna see it on a few of the slides because it's just super important. That's why we put it on there several times. And it's a professional quality of life self-test, self-assessment. So you go in and we'll have this link for you available, of course, and you can go in and pull up this link and take this self-test, and it lets you know if you're at a level of compassion fatigue. And it's very important for us to address that because we may not even recognize it until it's gotten too far. And what we want to do is help you to become so aware of what compassion fatigue looks like and what it could do that you recognize it immediately and you can start to do things to prevent it. So that's the whole purpose of the webinar today is to get to that place. Other ways that are more practical steps for you, so day-to-day routines that help break the cycle of compassion fatigue. Having a routine and structure just really creates an environment that is conducive to decreased anxiety and increased motivation. We just know that. That's physically, scientifically proven that routine is something we as humans need. So sleep adequately. Your brain needs a break too. Yes, the screening link is actually clickable in another slide for whoever asked that. You'll see another slide. It's this one. The slide that we're on in the very bottom is the link to that self-assessment. So sleep adequately. Your brain needs a break too. According to studies on healthguide.org, average adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Seriously, how many of us actually get 7 to 9 hours? It's a good question, right? None of us probably. So that's something to be aware of, that we are supposed to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Eat 3 balanced meals a day. Balanced nutrition increases energy and levels of concentration. So when you're eating balanced meals, your energy levels are going to increase. Your concentration and your focus is so much better. But it's 3 balanced meals. I'm going to say that again so y'all can hear me. 3 balanced meals a day. Do not skip breakfast and do not miss lunch. So going back to that case study we talked about at the beginning, if you're missing meals, if you're skipping meals, if you're working through meals, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, and then you're going to do a disservice for your clients. So make sure you're getting 3 meals. Establish a routine at home and at work. Stick with that routine. Don't let that routine change. Consistency helps create stability. You got to have a foundation, guys. You've got to. Ask for help when you need it. Don't be afraid to express your needs verbally. Take positive steps towards changing your environment. Do all the things that are in your control to do. That's how we do it. Do all the things that are in your control to do. And then educate yourself. So this webinar is a good way to educate yourself on compassion fatigue. There's some resources we'll bring up later. And then this is the link to that self-care assessment that we have talked about. on whether or not you might already be suffering from compassion fatigue. Okay, so then keeping a balance in your life, balancing exercise. Everybody always tells me I don't have time for exercise. That's not something I have time to do. You have to balance exercise. So start working at things that bring you joy. These simple exercises, these are really simple. You don't even have to get physical. You can do mental exercises, emotional exercises. It does not mean you have to go to the gym and work out, I promise. Name things that you're grateful for. Create a gratitude list. So start your day with a gratitude list. Think of something that's brought you some kind of sense of joy. You can create a top 10 list like we had earlier. Who do you love that you can reach out to today? Call them. Tell them. Let them tell you how much they love and appreciate you. And what made you laugh today? Share that with somebody. Help them to laugh too. Balance for your soul. Have quiet alone time in a calm, beautiful place. A retreat where you feel renewed. Have awareness of what restores and replenishes you. Find ways to acknowledge loss and grief. Acknowledgement is key. Speak out. Be verbal. Express yourself. Stay clear with commitment to career goals or your personal mission for life. Know how to focus on what you can control. It goes back to what we just said. Take control of what you can control. Look at situations as entertaining challenges and opportunities instead of problems or stresses. All right. And then healthy boundaries. This is extremely important. The best way to prevent compassion fatigue or to help you get out of compassion fatigue is to establish healthy boundaries. And this is something that we caregivers and helpers really struggle with because we think we have to give our all the time in order to do our job. And that's not the case. It really is not. People do not expect our all. They expect our best. And there's a big difference. So some healthy boundaries. Practice the art of self-management. Please say no. If you cannot do something because it's going to overwhelm you, just say no to it. It's okay. Totally okay. There are other people who are not overwhelmed who can do that specific task. Develop a healthy support system. Who are people that contribute to your self-esteem? Who listens well? Who are people that care and support you? Surround yourself with those people. Make sure that that's the environment that you place yourself in so that you don't feel like you're doing it all by yourself. Organize your life so you become proactive as opposed to reactive. So what that means is you're getting your life in such an organized, structured way that you're prepared for things. And so when they happen, no use crying over spilled milk, right? You clean it up and you get more milk. So it helps you to understand that your emotions can be dealt with consistently rather than your emotions being a reaction to something that probably didn't deserve such a reaction. Reserve your life energy for worthy causes. Choose your battles. Don't battle a battle that you don't need to. Choose your battles. Make sure your life energy is saved for the battles that you really need to fight in. And then live a balanced life. Sing, dance, sit with silence. Do what works for you. Whatever helps you to feel complete. Do that for you. And then I'm going to let Christine handle the mindfulness and meditation.
Hey guys. This was something that Candace and I spoke about after we did the last webinar, is that mindfulness and meditation is a really important aspect of taking care of ourselves. And the first one is talking about having attention to the present moment and context. The idea that when we attend to what's going on in the here and now, we're less likely to be distracted about the things that have happened before or the things that are going to happen. We often say that depression is living in the past and anxiety is living in the future. But when we attend to kind of the here and now moment and context, we're able to manage our emotional our responses and stress a lot more effectively. And so one of the ways that we can do that is through attunement. And that's just really being aware of what you're experiencing and being attuned to your emotional experience. So being able to be aware of and accept any kind of unpleasant or painful emotions you're having, And then building your capacity to tolerate those emotions. Candace was mentioning on the previous slide about, choosing your battles. Sometimes we fight against those negative emotions, which is using energy that we don't necessarily need to expend on that kind of thing. We are all going to experience negative emotions. And if you've worked with anybody who's experienced any kind of trauma, you know that. And so we also have to work on expanding our ability to deal with those emotions in effective ways and recognize that they exist, but they're not going to last forever. And then the next one is egalitarianism, is the idea that we don't hold all the answers to the questions that our clients face. I had a supervisor one time who said, Christine, you were not born with a cape. You were not expected to solve everyone's problems. And anyone who knows me very well knows that I try to solve everyone's problems, try to address everything. And it's a good reminder for me and for all of us as helping people that we're not meant to know all the answers and to try to give and solve every problem for every person that we encounter. And so one way to combat compassion fatigue is to remind ourselves of the limitations that we have just because we're human, and that's okay. And accept the fact that sometimes we are with people, but we don't have to solve all their problems. We don't have to necessarily give them all the answers for their questions, but we can help them move through those. And then, Candace, do you want to do building connections or you want me to?
You can do it. You're doing a great job.
So building connections here we added is the idea that, what Candace mentioned is about therapists having therapists and that being really important to talk about your stress, process your thoughts and reactions with others. It might be a coworker, it might be a therapist, it might be a trusted pastor, friend or family, or even your supervisor. The idea is that it's not about venting and being negative. It's about recognizing, like what we were just talking about, being attuned to those negative emotions and recognizing and acknowledging those negative feelings that we're having and helping to express them so they don't take over our body. We want to have that support system that's really positive, not one that fuels your stress. A lot of times we get into these negative, nagging, critical place where we can over and over and over again just start bashing what we're doing, or we can start getting really negative about being helpers and things like that. And so it's really important to make sure that we have a positive support around us. And one of the things that I found while I was doing some research was the idea of pets. For those of you who are animal people, if you're not, that's okay. You can have a pet rock. But the idea that pets accept whatever affection you're able to give them without asking for more. Although there are some dogs who are a little needy and they nuzzle their ways in there. But just being able to have a pet who can sit with you and not ask for your emotional putting out all the time and being able to just sit and help you calm. Research does show that it does lower blood pressure and heart rate when interacting with animals. So that might be one way to be, that you could help yourself if you're experiencing some of that burnout or compassion fatigue.
Okay, and then the final slide that we have is just, it's just kind of letting you know that, with compassion fatigue, one of the feelings you get is that maybe you're in the wrong field or you're not doing the right thing, and maybe you should change your career choice, and all of these doubts that we start to have about being in the helping profession. And we just want to encourage you not to give up. You're in the helping profession because you are a helper. Don't give up on your purpose, but find a way to achieve balance. So don't let compassion fatigue get you to a place where you think maybe you aren't good at what you do, or that this isn't what you're supposed to be doing. You wouldn't be in this field if you weren't a helping person, and it's a helping profession. So definitely don't give up. Take some of the advice that we've given, some of the things that we've thrown out as far as resources to use to help you to address compassion fatigue, so that you can continue in what you're intended to do, which is help other people.
Yep.
And then there's some additional resources here, some websites that we've put in. And Christine, these slides will actually be available, right, for them to access.
Yeah, when I send out the survey, I will send out these as a PDF. I did put that test link in the chat section. so that folks could click on it, because it wasn't clickable from the slide. Like, it was clickable on your slide, but it wasn't from our screen here. So I stuck that in there for folks to have.
Sorry, guys, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. It's okay. All right. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Candace. We really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions or feedback that, or just comments about compassion fatigue, how you've experienced it, anything you'd like to share with us or ask? All right. Well, I'm going to take that as a no. Totally fine. I'll be sending out the email with the survey here in probably just a few minutes. And so feel free to, if you do have questions that you'd rather ask there, feel free to just respond to the email, and Candace or I can give you some answers or feedback based on your questions. And if we don't know the answers, we can find them. We really appreciate y'all being here with us today, and hope that you keep an eye out for our next webinar. We'll have one in the new year and a few more after that. All right. Thanks so much, Candace. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, guys.